Yes, friends. On a Wednesday, it's OGP, the One Giant podcast, coming at you flying solo. Adam Armbrecht breaking down the Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast, and incidentally, having on a very special guest here, about 5-10 minutes from now, Tyler Rowland, Locked On Titans. We're gonna have him break down from the other side of the field how this Week One matchup looks like. But in the meantime, no healthy, wealthy, and wise Andrew Makowitz today. Later today, around noon, we're going to have that second half of our conversation from yesterday where Andy and I break down now taking a look at the Giants defense and trying to handle that Tennessee Titans offense, the return of Derrick Henry, the turnover in that wide receiver room, and some of the areas that Andy and I actually disagree a little bit around where the Giants can have success, how they can go about having success. So you're going to want to check that out, obviously. Big shout out to Marty. Why? Because Marty, you were in here right out the gates, ready to roll the minutes ahead of schedule, even. So, always appreciate everyone that comes in on these lives. We're going to keep doing them. We know yesterday was a unique one. Didn't get to come in at the 8 a.m. slot like we've been trying to do. So, we appreciate everybody for checking out the first half of our Week 1 Tennessee Titan matchup breakdown. That being the case, while we wait for Tyler to join in on the conversation. A couple of news and notes. I actually did just pick up here this morning, taking a look. Wanted to find out who it was because that's going to be all right. Mike Garofalo of NFL Network reported that the Ravens are signing veteran linebacker Tyler Fackrell, one-time New York Giants. He had also spent time with the Chargers and the Raiders. That's what we're going to call not necessarily news, all things considered. Did you even remember that Kyler Fackrell was a New York Football Giant? So that news and note goes a little bit by the wayside. What won't go by the wayside, though, for us is the Giants' depth chart here. Because in between yesterday, and when you hear the conversation later today, it's not necessarily going to include who is going to be starting potentially, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but even across the offensive side, which we spoke about yesterday morning. That's because when the unofficial official depth chart came out here, Ben Bredesen is going to be starting at left guard for the New York Football Giants going into this Week 1 matchup. I'm not going to say that it's shocking. However, and the reason why I say it's not shocking is because Ben Bredesen had been playing well. They shuffled him along the line. We know he's a holdover from last year. Weren't sure what to expect. And I think he actually ends up falling in a lot of ways into that same category of, hey, a player that we weren't sure where the skill level was, weren't sure what to expect. He came in. I think he was a little bit shaky to start the offseason, but gradually built himself into form and built himself into a reliable depth piece. Now, does that mean that you want to have him starting on week 1 against the Tennessee Titans? Certainly not. However, in a fill in opportunity, he is the most experienced player, experienced in quotes, that the Giants have in camp ready to go here. Now, in theory, you could go with a Joshua Zudu. However, he missed time over the course of training camp. As we know, they brought in Devery Hamilton, shuffled him around a little bit. And then you even have a Jack Anderson. I'm maybe a little bit surprised because when we talked about it, Andy was leaning, I think, towards Hamilton. I had said that for me, I thought that Jack Anderson is a guy who, while limited, has reps, has shown capable of playing in the NFL. You throw him in for one, right? You say, we're going to live with the results here, at least until we get Shane Lemieux back and see what he looks like physically. That being the case, though, they're going to go with Ben Bredesen across the offensive line, and you feel okay with it. Now, the one thing I think that'll be interesting from last year to this year, from the previous regime to this year, Brian Dable talked about having scheme versatility in this one. Across the line, wanting to see guys, not scheme versatility, position versatility, wanting to see the offensive line be able to have some guys that play at guard, play at center, play at tackle, play at guard, right? And I think from the depth perspective, it makes sense. But on a game to game basis, remember last year, we would talk about how, well, whatever gets the job done, right? You run out player X for 13 reps on a drive because you're going to be more run heavy. Then you're going to pivot and you're going to lean more into the pass blocking unit because you don't have good enough players across the board to get the job done with consistency. If Ben Bredesen is the player As long as he performs adequately in game one, then you use him for game two. Now, I guess the one caveat could be, are they waiting for Jack Anderson to get to the speed? Is there something with Devery Hamilton that they're waiting for him to be able to step in? That's possible. The other one, obviously, me personally, I just look at it and say, now Jack Anderson is also a young player, by the way, but you have Joshua Azudu. Uh, it's such an unfortunate thing that he missed time in training camp, because if he had been healthy all camp long and getting his reps, I think that he's out there week one. I really do think that he would be out there, but he missed time, and it's hard to justify putting in a player like him coming in, learning the system, a player that was regarded as being a little bit more of a raw prospect. And even though he's flashed already in camp, you don't want to risk stunting his growth, hurting his confidence by throwing him out there too soon. So that's number one. As we work our way through, though, we can flip it over to the other side of the football here for a second. There's a couple of great things though that also come out in this. But then over on the defensive side, so when you hear about the breakdown attacking this Tennessee Titans offense later today with Andy and myself, you're going to hear us talk about that linebacking core and talk about how it's thin, getting rid of Blake Martinez, obviously. I throw it in, and it's not a throwaway comment. I just at one point remind myself and hopefully everyone out there that Austin Calitro made this roster, right? And he is a veteran linebacker. Now, I personally like to go with youth. That being said, it's really hard to look at the depth chart of this New York Football Giants linebacking core and say, okay, it's going to be Tay Crowder, like we all assumed it would be, coming into this season. No Darian Beavers, obviously, but Carter Coughlin has been a guy that's found a niche on special teams somewhat. He's been a depth piece inside the linebacking room. I don't know, unlike, say, a Cam Brown, who maybe they started to use a little bit more on the defensive side. He's our best special teams player. But now when you see him start to get some of those reps and you're hearing some more chatter around him, you can envision the growth for him and underneath Wink Martindale, how he might get better utilized and start to find a little bit of a rep sample size. Carter Coughlin's a hard one to lean into. Micah McFadden is the rookie. He didn't do anything wrong over the course of the preseason and training camp. Again, it's just really hard to see throwing a rookie into that set of circumstances. So that's why I really do think that the Austin Calitro and Tay Crowder combination, that is the highest level of veteran experience. In quotes, if you're watching on YouTube, like that's the veteran experience that you have. Kalitro's been around the league. He's 28 years old. He obviously understands. The one thing that we saw in the preseason from him was a guy that gets it. And I just mean, sometimes just being around, right? Age, it's hard to beat age when it comes to having a sense of what works and what doesn't. The repetition, not to no double entendre intended. He can come in, read and diagnose plays, and make the right football play. Is he going to be the most athletic player? Is he going to be the best player that you could have out there? Maybe not. But early on in the season, especially here in week one, putting out a guy that you think, hey, go make the right play, that benefits you. And Tay Crowder is a guy who we've talked about on this podcast too. Was he the ideal candidate to be starting this year at inside linebacker? No. Now, it's fascinating if you think back to the idea that that you have a guy like Darian Beavers coming on and he's looking strong, and you think this is exactly the guy that I thought that we stole. Go back and watch the draft coverage where I am absolutely elated that they pick him. A lot of guys around the Giants too, that cover the Giants, have looked at him and said, yeah, didn't think he was going to be there when the Giants were able to take him. He is there, and that athleticism maybe changes what the plan or dynamic is at the inside linebacker position. And it also changes how you look at Tay Crowder and what you expect him to do. So it'll be fascinating to see how he looks in this game and how he looks early in the season. We had talked about him and wondered, here's a guy that maybe you like a little bit more, being able to kind of drop back a little bit, use some of his speed. He's a little bit undersized. So is Micah McFadden. So you feel like you have that same mold of player now there at that position. Now the other inside line again, even if it was all even and they had released uh Blake Martinez, I would have really liked the Darian Beavers starting linebacker role with Kalitro right in behind him, right? Veteran experience in behind him, and then seeing how things flesh out. So Kalitro will be in there alongside Tay Crowder. It's something else that we can watch for. Again, we talk about the defensive side of the ball here later this afternoon when that episode will premiere both on YouTube and the podcast feed. The other interesting notes that have come out here is that, and we're going to get into this more as the week progresses, but injury concerns around, excuse me, the edge group, Ojulari and Thibodeau on the defensive side. That's going to be a curiosity. Ward comes in with a questionable tag. Timon Fox, get ready, buddy, because there could be some of you out there, right? Along with a guy like O'Shane Ximenez, as we've talked about. Now, O'Shane, we're really looking at him as being in the inside of that linebacker core when we think about how we're going to line them up. But Thibodeau, again, weak side, strong side linebacker, edge rusher group. O'Shane Ximenez is going to be there. Timon Fox is going to be there. I'm not going to be shocked in this game, especially with the concerns that you have there on the defensive front injury wise. If we don't actually see more of a 4-man front, especially going up against a guy like Derrick Henry, something that we will talk about. Oh, with Tyler Rowland, who I just saw pop into the background here. So we will not delay or wait any longer because this is really why we came in here this morning to begin with. Anyway, let's go ahead and get him up in the room. Tyler Rowland, Locked on Titans podcast, man. How are you? Thank you so much for making a very short turnaround, a very quick request, a very polite yes. I'd be happy to do it. How are you, sir?
Yeah, not a problem at all, man. It's time for the season, and it means I'm accepting any and all requests. Essentially, there's nothing I love more than talking ball, and never more excited than right before the season kicks off. So not a problem at all. Thanks for having me on. Always excited to get another perspective. You know, I'm here to talk about the Titans for your audience, but I always tend to learn a few things from what you have to say in response as well. So it's good for my preparation for the game, anyways.
Well, that's it, man. And we'll of course have you bounce a couple off of me if you'd like to. But in the old vein that when you look at these two teams, the Tennessee Titans have had turnover, the wide receiver room, obviously, there's some injury concerns there on the defensive side of the ball. However, like Vrabel, Ryan Tannehill, right? Like Derrick Henry coming back off an injury. This is a 12-5 team from last year. This does just feel like, hey, let's play some pieces, but let's go forward like the team that we have been, right? This identity that we've had. The
Right.
Giants are this turnover roster. Just from the outside looking in, does the Joe Shane, Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, Wink Martindale quadfecta do anything to the perception of what the Giants are around the league relative to the last couple of years, where I think when you looked at the coaching staff and everything there, you just said, yeah, guys, we'll see you. We'll see you when you make some changes.
Well, I think from the outside looking in, you're willing to give it a chance. You know what I mean? It kind of creates an open-minded situation. Now, unfortunately, if they come out and they start slow and, you know, it's 2-5, it's 3-4, then maybe the honeymoon period goes away and everybody slides back into that hole of, oh, the Giants are bad. It's easy to say that, blah, blah, blah. Me personally, something that I've said, when I looked at the schedule, I was excited to play the Giants in week 1. I think that the best version of the New York Giants is going to be in the mid to late part of the season, where not only the players fully understand the why they're schematically being asked to do what they're doing, but also the coaching staff has been able to see, okay, this player just simply can't do this role. This guy can. You know, the coaches and the players have to adjust a bit to the new system. And we can talk all we want about preseason and training camp, but it matters in the real games. That's when you really got to get your answers. So I think the best version of the Giants will be that mid to late season version where they rip off some wins and they feel better in the system. Maybe even Tyrod Taylor is in at quarterback. I don't know. But that's not what it's going to be week 1 against the Titans. And while there is the unknown of what they'll do, and that makes it a little tough for the Titans to game plan, at the same time, I don't know that everyone will be comfortable yet with this new system, with this new scheme. And it may give the Titans a little bit of an advantage now in week 1 that they maybe wouldn't have had later on in the year. It may have been a loss for the Titans later in the year, whether it's, you know, just coming out swinging. I do think the Titans will be able to find a way to win at home in week 1. So it's just good timing for the Titans to play this team. But for me, I am not super down on the Giants. I like the roster. They just, like a lot of teams, they got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. And sadly, I've been a Daniel Jones defender, and the train is almost to the stations.
Well, you mentioned unknown. It's unknown on the Giants side of it, right? As much as you're saying, right? The Giants
Right,
have
right.
unknowns for themselves. But to your point, man, we have the great debate, myself and my co-host Andy, when he's in, the Daniel Jones debate. And Giants fans, for the most part, they want to hold on to that, and I get why, because every time that it doesn't work out, it's just it's another restart process. We'll stay away from that for the most part, just because mostly when I say I think it's over for Daniel Jones and the Giants are going to move on, it tends to bring the ire of the
Right.
fan base.
I hear you.
There's a couple of things that I found interesting. One, for the offensive side of the football, Derrick Henry is coming back from injury. We talked about, listen, gotta stop Derrick Henry. The first question is he going to be right back in form? He had, I think, the second lowest yards per carry last year prior to his injury. Now, still 4.3, so it's not like we're scoffing at the
Right.
numbers there. But I thought something was interesting. I know you have a pretty nice rotation of running backs there. Hassan Haskins, to me, when you read everything about what he was as a prospect and what he comes out, he's power, he's bruiser, he's quote one-dimensional in a good way.
Right.
Is that a part of what the process is going to be here on the offensive side of the ball? Where, hey, Derrick Henry's coming back from injury, but guess what? When we can't batter ram you, we're just going to go ahead and ram you again with a different batter.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I think that has to be the philosophy. And I think Hassan Haskins needs to get, 4 to 5 carries every game just to get Derrick Henry away from that 30, 28 carry mark where he was at last year. It's my opinion, and a lot of people would tell you this, that the Jones fracture that he experienced was a load bearing injury. Like you've had too much, weight on your feet, slam your feet into the ground, and it, wore down the bone. So, now I'm no doctor, but that's just what we heard last year.
But you can play one on the podcast.
Yes, I can. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
That's right.
But I think that not only will Haskins be able to take maybe 4 or 5 carries in short yardage situations where they feel confident they can pick up the yardage, they don't need Henry back there, but Dontrell Hilliard is going to step in as that complementary back, that speed back. And I think not only is he going to be used on third downs and be that pass catching back, but I think they're going to try to rotate him in during normal situations where Derrick Henry would have got the ball last year and give it to Hilliard just to keep the defense off balance with what kind of running back that they're facing. Like a pitcher. Yeah, you may be Nolan Ryan with a 100-mile-per-hour fastball, but you can't get up there and throw the 100-mile-per-hour fastball every single pitch. You got to mix in the changeup. And some of these great pitchers, all they got to have is just a good changeup. What was it? Mariano Rivera had the circle change along with the fastball, and those two pitches were just dominant. You know what I mean? So the Titans want to find some other pitches that they can count on. I think it'll be Hilliard, and I think it'll be Haskins. But at the end of the day, Derrick Henry's going to get his 20, 22, 23 carries a game. And if the Titans want to be successful, it's almost necessary with the lack of explosion that they have in their pass catching unit right now.
It's going to be fascinating. So it sounds like, could plan for a little bit of a let's not mess up Derrick Henry before we need Derrick Henry, and that's for playoff football. But when you get to that wide receiving core, it was funny. Yesterday when we talked about offense versus defense and vice versa, we're going to have a deeper discussion about that coming up on our podcast. But we do get into Robert Woods, and I don't want to gild the lily on some of what we discuss. Are you confident in what Robert Woods is going to be? Because to me, there's a little bit of a question mark. He's 30 years old. He's coming off of an injury season last year. Now, don't get me wrong. You look at the stats, you know what he's capable of. But I kind of chalked it up. When I look at this receiving core, I say, okay, so Adoree Jackson, go do your job. Former Tennessee Titan. If that's the best weapon right now, and there's some young talent there too, obviously. But if he is the number one threat, I have to assume that my number one corner can at least contain him for the majority of the game.
And I think that's one of the major issues with the Titans this year. I think that's ultimately what has the potential to lower their potential, I guess, to go back to that, to lower what their ceiling is. But my problem here is while I'm confident that Robert Woods is a solid player and a good veteran, he's been a number 2 receiver. He's a number 2 receiver. He's a guy that when all the attention is on the number 1 guy, Robert Woods can find those little nooks and crannies in the zone defense. Robert Woods is going up against the second best cornerback, to which he can use that route craft and that nuance to feint him this way, head move this way, turn the other way, wide open. All the things that I think make Robert Woods such a consistent threat as a receiver are quite frankly diminished if you make him the number one target that a defense has to worry about. He's simply not explosive enough and not an explosive enough athlete right now to take the main attention in the pass catching group from the defense. He's just simply not that guy. When the Titans traded for Robert Woods, they still had A.J. Brown in the fold. Now you're cooking with gas when you put Robert Woods with a guy like A.J. Brown, a guy like Brandon Cooks, a guy like Cooper Kupp. You know what I mean? When you have all the attention on Robert Woods, he is simply not explosive or physical enough to win when all things are on, when the chips are against him nonstop. And on the opposite side of the field, you're putting out Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who's a good story as a Titans, roster guy who's an undrafted free agent, practice squad, to the roster, getting some snaps. Now he's all the way to a starter. Well, that's a great, fun story and all, but at the end of the day, you got a wide receiver 4 starting for you.
Right, okay. Because you see the 4 touchdowns from him last year, and you think, is there a growth opportunity here? Or is it, again, just the result and a byproduct of the talent you had there, whether Julio Jones is who he was or is going to be, combined with A.J. Brown, you're the beneficiary of that, obviously.
Yeah, 100%. And not only that, but it was just volume last year. The Titans were so injured that he just played so much and he was reliable, and that's great. But at the end of the day, he's not a yards after catch threat. And the Titans offense is built upon getting 8 men in the box, using play action to create a hole over the middle, get the ball to a playmaker, and let him make yards after catch opportunities. Well, Robert Woods and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine are not yards after catch dynamos. They're not going to take advantage of what the Titans offense is trying to do. And while you have a guy like Treylon Burks, who could be that guy eventually, it's hard to expect him to be that guy right away.
Yeah.
And I am a tad bit worried that the Titans simply don't have enough explosive playmakers on the outside to take advantage of the space that Derrick Henry can ultimately create. And if you're not as worried about the back end, then you're more worried about the front end, and that can make it harder on Derrick Henry as well. So a lack of explosive playmakers at wide receiver, I think, could ultimately not only harm the pass game, but it could harm the running game as well.
And that's what we talk about so much about, hey, focus on Derrick Henry, focus on the run game, focus on a quarterback that's sub 4,000 yards on the season, even though the consistency is obviously there with a player like Tannehill. The one thing you notice is the touchdowns to interceptions last year took a much different skew once you lost Derrick Henry, even though they were still top 5 in rushing. You saw there's still an impact, though, and it's about those big plays, those plays that you need to get down the field, or key red zone opportunities where you just don't have the same level of threat. We'll get you out here on this then, because on the flip side of it, when you look at, there's 2 things here. First of all, you must love looking at your roster and essentially seeing everyone be healthy, because the Giants just have a myriad of question marks and IR and pup list. There's a couple of key guys for the Titans, but by and large, a healthy roster coming into the season. When you look from the defensive side of the ball, and I say that there's Kenny Golladay, or at least someone that looks like him standing on the field there, but specifically with Kadarius Toney, Saquon Barkley, Sterling Shepard is on point here to come back and be healthy to start the season. Rookie Wan'Dale Robinson. Is that the biggest area of concern for the Tennessee Titans defense? What this secondary is going to do, how they're going to defend against a lot of different weapons here, including Saquon Barkley coming out of the backfield?
I got to be honest with you. I don't have really any concerns about the Titans defense. I don't.
It's upsetting. We were hoping for something a little bit, throw a bone to the Giants fans, Tyler, please.
Yeah, I mean, at least Harold Landry tore his ACL for you guys, and he's out for the year. He had 12 sacks last year for the Titans. Yeah. And let me just talk about Harold Landry, and that'll probably give Giants fans just a little bit of hope, because when Mike Vrabel was hired, one of the big things he talked about was front multiplicity. The Titans aren't a 3-4. The Titans aren't a 4-3. The Titans are whatever the heck they want to be. And the reason that they can be whatever they want to be is because Harold Landry could play 3-4 outside linebacker. Harold Landry could put his hand in the dirt and play a 4-3 defensive end. Harold Landry could stand up and play 4-3 stack linebacker. And that allows the Titans to be whatever they need to be from down to down to down. There is no one who the Titans are going to be able to get to replace his versatile skill set, which means they'll probably have to play a more basic front, not move around as much. I'm sure they'll try, but when you don't have that guy like Harold Landry, not only that, the Titans did a ton of stunts and games up front. They do these things called simulated pressures. It was a big talking point throughout the league in the offseason, actually, the way the Titans set up their pressures. But one particular stunt that they use a lot is they'll have their two interior defensive linemen slant to the outside, like towards an offensive tackle, and Harold Landry will loop behind them and come through the A gap to the center and the guard. Well, Harold Landry is athletic enough and bendable enough to run that loop and get through there. I don't think the Titans can replace his role within the games and stunts. I don't think the Titans can replace his versatility that allows them to have that front multiplicity. So that will maybe pare down what the Titans can do throughout the season, not having Landry. But the reality is the two all-pros for the Titans defense, Jeffrey Simmons at defensive tackle and Kevin Byard at safety, are still there. And they still have a $20 million edge in Bud Dupree and Danico Autry, who had, 9 sacks last year, and a good linebacker group. And they have Christian Fulton, who is a lockdown corner last year. Amani Hooker was the third highest rated safety on Pro Football Focus, and nobody seems to know who Amani Hooker is. The guy's going to get paid after the year, and people are going to be like, who's this guy Hooker? So I guess although the Titans' ceiling as a defense, I thought they could be top 3, top 1 in the NFL this year, bringing everybody back. Without Landry, I think that ceiling drops just a little bit. But at the end of the day, I still think they're going to be a top 5, top 8 defense. And if the Titans could simply stop the run and put Daniel Jones in 2nd and long and 3rd and long situations, they're going to be able to force some turnovers and get pressure. So I would tell Giants fans that if the Giants are able to run the ball, which with their interior offensive line, I'm a little skeptical whether they will. But if they do, if they can win that battle and they can run the ball and put Daniel Jones in 2nd and short, 3rd and short, where he doesn't have to hold the ball and look to make plays and scramble, then they should be able to have a good flow of offense. But I think it'll be tough against the Titans defense. I'm expecting to be really, really good.
And Byard and Hooker, you mentioned it there. When you have strength like that at the back end of the defense, you can keep things in front of you and still put a level of pressure on the front offensive line for the opposition. It creates a little bit of chaos, a little bit of mistakes, potentially a little bit of risk. And then we have confidence on the back end there to reward the defense, right, for getting that pressure. So this is one of those situations. First and foremost, thank you to Tyler Rowland, obviously, for making time for us from the Locked On Titans podcast. This is one of those games where I think it's easy to look at the AFC or to look across the NFL and say, are the Titans a sexy team, right? Ryan Tannehill doesn't do anything for you. Guess
they
what?
Are not.
Since he became a Titan, the Titans have been winning. They've been going to the playoffs, right? And I think it's a good barometer out the gates here for the Giants. I don't anticipate them necessarily to win this game by any stretch, but if they can stay competitive, if they can be in a game against a team like the Titans who can play consistent like they do under Vrabel, that's a good sign for a developing, young, growing team. It's just really hard when you listen to someone like you who's experienced, covers the X's and O's of the Titans, to hear you break it down and say, no, though. I've got Calitro at linebacker, and I've got Ben Bredesen starting at left guard. You better watch out. But hey, that's why they play them on Sundays. As we say, it'll be really exciting to see this get kicked off. And at least take this little grain from Tyler Rowland, friends. He's happy to be playing the Giants earlier than later in the season. That's something.
I like the Giants.
Yeah.
I personally, I like the roster. I like some of the things they're doing. I like the hires of Dable and Martindale. Yeah. I personally, like I said, I've been a Daniel Jones defender. And while that train may be leaving the station officially, I still think that they have a smart plan and they have some good pieces on the roster to, if they don't do what they want to do this year, they can do it soon. Yeah. Like I said, I am happy to play the Giants in week 1. So I have been telling everyone who will listen since like June, since we initially got the lines, take the Giants with the points. And I think it's like 6.5 or something right now. Started out at I was on them at 4.5. I think this will be a close game. I think it'll be 3 to 4 points. I see 24-20.
Okay.
I'm thinking 27-23, somewhere in there. Maybe 21-17, 20-17, something like that. I still think it'll be a close competitive game. And if the Giants are able to win, God, what a feather in the hat for Brian Dable to get buy-in from the team and show them this is a team that's been to the playoffs 3 years in a row. This is the 4th most winningest team over the last 6 years in the NFL. and we went in on their field and beat them. Let's go. This could be a pivot point in the Giants season of, really coming out of the gate hot, or, maybe just trying to find their footing later in the year, like I'm kind of projecting.
And of course, if the Titans were to lose at home to the Giants, be sure to check out Tyler Rowland on the Locked On Titans podcast, because
Yes,
undoubtedly
yes.
the fan base will be having a much more drastic reaction to a game
Right.
like that. Tyler Rowland, really appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully we can connect during the season, because I know one thing you gave a little glimpse of it. You are a big X's and O's guy. And I think that sometimes it's very easy to watch these games and not see some of the subtleties of how
Right.
things get accomplished on both sides of the ball. So even just beyond the Titans, go check out his work, because it is an insight into the way the game gets played, not just the results. Tyler Rowland, Locked On Titans, thank you again for making some time for us.
Yeah, not a problem at all. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter at Tic Tac Titans, I do
Yes.
I do a film thread every Tuesday or Wednesday. My Wednesday show on Locked On Titans is called Rewatch Wednesday, where I talk scheme. And although it's from a Titans angle, of course, because I'm pointing out things for the Titans, you can also learn a lot about what the Giants were doing schematically in their first game by seeing their route combination, seeing what defensive coverages they come out in, how they pressure the quarterback, where their stunts are coming from, things like that. Those are all things you'd be able to pick up from a Giants perspective as well.
Tic Tac Titans, my favorite handle to date on Twitter. Be sure to check them out. Thanks again, Tyler.
Yep, not a problem. Thank you.
All right. That is, of course, Tyler Rowland from the Locked On Titans podcast. Gives a little bit more of his time than I asked of him. But as you know, when you start talking football, it becomes very easy to go over, to extend the conversation, and to want to go a little bit deeper. But listen, let's just talk about a couple of those takeaways there. You can hopefully feel a little bit more confident around the fact that he looks at the New York Football Giants as a team that later in the year you wouldn't want to see. And I think we've all had that sense when you talk about the Giants and what they're capable of accomplishing this season. It's going to be a growth process, let alone the injuries. No Kayvon Thibodeau, potentially Azeez Ojulari working back, right? So we know the things we're not going to have early in the season. We know the things we're never going to have. I mentioned it there inside of the conversation with him. We'll get out of here in a few minutes, but Sterling Shepard says that he's also ready to go for the New York Football Giants coming into week one. Do I expect him to be out there for max reps? Maybe, maybe not. However, when you look at this depth chart, and I think you start to talk about this team from the perspective of the wide receiver group does look like, as of right now, they have listed Wan'Dale Robinson being up there on the depth chart as the slot receiver, with Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay on the outside. Then you're going to have Sterling Shepard in behind Kadarius Toney. We obviously know he can play in behind Wan'Dale Robinson as well. David Sills is going to be in the mix. Richie James also. I have not seen, though I am taking a look around here right now. Darius Slayton was excused from practice yesterday. The only connection that anyone has made, at least to this point from what I've seen, is that Blake Martinez was excused from practice, and we know how that turned out for the inside linebacker for the New York Football Giants. He was ultimately released. The question that I have here is, were the Giants, as we had talked about previously, trying to wait it out, trying to give themselves an opportunity to get a trade market developed for Darius Slayton, see how things fleshed it out? But ultimately, if it didn't work out and the Giants feel comfortable, specifically even with Sterling Shepard and his health, because that just adds another body into the room, and in Wan'Dale Robinson's development, maybe they're going to move on in the same way that they moved on from Blake Martinez. It's not apples to apples in terms of what Blake has accomplished over the course of his career, but the role, the functionality of, he's not the perfect thing you need, but he was something that could function for you. Darius Slayton is not the perfect player you need, but he can function for you. The Giants may be making the choice here to move away from that, even though the restructure had them getting underneath and having operational money when it came to one Leonard Williams. What do we got here? I'm hoping someone dies at Thaddeus Moss's knees and takes him out in week one. I'm not a big fan of that, Charles. I'm going to say I get where you're coming from. Don't like it that it happened to Kayvon Thibodeau. Obviously, we can put this down as being that was a dirty, aggressive play that he made in the preseason game. It can also be that he's been a clunky, raw type of player at the NFL level, hasn't got on to active rosters, hasn't made appearances in the NFL, been on practice squads, and sometimes that's what happens, right? So when you take a high premier talent like Kayvon Thibodeau and you put him up with a guy that has been a practice squad bounce around, sometimes things like that happen. The instincts aren't always perfectly aligned. And people said, even going back to Carl Banks, not to get far afield here, but people did say, hey, that's one of those scenarios where also if you're Kayvon Thibodeau, you want to dip that shoulder, lower that knee, and blow that blocker up. That's why I say there's no blame on any side of that, because you could look at it from a few different angles and assess which way the wind blows. That being the case, there's nothing else really surprising that came out inside of this depth chart. There's just going to be curiosity here as the week progresses around what we anticipate with Kayvon Thibodeau, with Azeez Ojulari. If those guys aren't available, then we get into a bit of a situation here. And we'll talk later today, as I said, releasing at high noon. We'll discuss what it looks like for the New York Football Giants defense to try to control, to try to disrupt, to try to get after this Titans offense with Ryan Tannehill, the return of Derrick Henry, and as you heard Tyler Rowland mention, some question marks inside of that wide receiver room. That being the case, my friends, you heard actually Tyler use the slogan a couple of times. At the end of the day, you can see the breakdown for the New York Football Giants defense taking on the Tennessee Titans offense. That'll be on the podcast feed and on YouTube later today. Come back in tomorrow. We're going to be talking more about game predictions, specifically what we think Daniel Jones is going to be capable of doing, who's going to lead the wide receiving core, which defensive players are going to make the disruptive plays for Wink Martindale that affords the Giants to stay in this one. And then on Friday, we'll be taking a look at some of the betting lines, props, fantasy football. All of that's going to be covered. We'll even take a little peek at Thursday Night Football tomorrow as well. So you know the deal, friends. Get us over on the podcast feed. Get over to the YouTube channel. Like it, love it, want more of it. We appreciate all the support to Marty, to Charles getting in on the conversation in the chat, everybody that joined in on the live stream. We'll be back again at high noon today with that look at the Giants defense, and then right back at it tomorrow, all throughout the week, all season long, as it is New York Football Giants traveling down to Tennessee to take on those Titans. As somebody else pointed out yesterday, by the way, here's a food for thought. Giants and Titans, it basically means the same thing. Big guys. I don't know. Whatever it's worth. That's what they said. That's what I said. That's what you heard. We'll be back again tomorrow talking all things New York Football Giants. And as Andy Makowitz would want if he were here, and nay, demand the people know, as always, let's go Big Blue.